Hello, everybody. Welcome to a Sonic Talk special, where I'm very pleased to be able to talk to Hazel Mills, who you may remember from, we did a rig tour with her from the Goldfrapp tour, which I think was last year in Bath, which did very well. People were very interested in what you had to say, Hazel, and what you were doing with Goldfrapp. But also, I was looking back, and there's some shots of you in a thing we did with the Moog Ensemble from 2008. So that's going back some. And you were playing, you'd just been dropped in with the SH09 and had to kind of figure out how to deal with it. How are you, first of all?
I'm very well. Wow, a lot's happened since then. Yeah, I'm pretty good. I'm just over some jet lag, so I'm starting to feel human again, getting stuck into some music and some gardening, so I'm really happy.
Oh, nice. Good time of year for gardening. Well, actually, that brings me to my first. How very nicely linked of you. You're kind of an interviewer's dream, because I was going to say, you've just, not only do you, I mean, your repertoire or your career path, lots of live stuff. You've just had your EP out now, which is The Embrace. I love the sound of it. It's got there are some great influences there without them being tall overpowering. It's just really nice to hear those
thank you.
And it's still got that kind of, I call it the Bristol soup. There's that sort of, the low end is just like, okay, that sounds like it's from Bristol. It's just got that kind of thing going on. And I'm very much encourage everybody to go and listen to that. It's a great sounding piece of work, actually, I have to say.
Thank you.
But on top of that, you just got back from Australia, where you were with the Moog Ensemble, which was probably the last time we physically met, wasn't it? Because I think I worked on that project where it was the launch of the Moog Model D. We could debate which is right, of course, for hours. And that was at Bristol in the Mount Without. The Mount Without? Mm-hmm. Was it the Mount Without?
That sounds familiar, yeah.
That was a great... I really enjoyed doing that. That was where, for those of you, again, who haven't seen that, that's where you were one of the players in the Moog. You've been with the Moog Ensemble for, what, must be more than 10 years now, on and off, I guess,
Just over 10 years, yeah.
And that was...
crazy.
It's really interesting, because it kind of marries... that's very much a kind of classical gig, because you're very much sight reading a lot of that stuff, and you're playing to quite a strict... layout, and in that particular case there was a lot of click tracks and a lot of just to make sure that everything was editable, because it was done in a number of parts. But it was actually a live take. I think people probably don't realise that. It was pretty much, I think the only thing that was inserted was a couple of shots of Eddie's solo, because they couldn't be in shot looking at his hands and not in shot at the same time, and also some Harriet bits. Who there's a great shot of Harriet, actually, where she's just sort of standing there like with her sticks in the air. It's like, looks fantastic at the back of the hall. Yeah, great fun though, that was, wasn't it?
Yeah, really good day. A really good day. It's such a lovely space to do, really beautiful space to do something like that, and just really fun thing to be spending a day doing. Can't complain.
So the thing that I find kind of interesting about what you seem to have fallen into the live performance side of things. That's all in terms of the visible work that you do. You've done Florence and The Machine, obviously touring live with Goldfrapp, many other gigs as well, and obviously most recently going to Australia, which must have been a lot of fun. Did you plan? Was this the thing that you wanted to do, or is your heart more in your own music and releasing your own things? Because obviously you've got an EP out as well at the same time. I was just curious which is the sort of the path you thought you'd be heading down.
Yeah, it isn't at all. Once I had accepted that music was my life, because I originally wanted to act when I was younger. I did a lot of theatre, and although music was always a big part of my life from a very young age, I just thought, well, yeah, that's me, but I never saw it as a career for some reason. But yeah, once I'd figured out that's what I was doing, I've been songwriting since I was about 10 maybe, and improvising, making up music since I was even younger than that, when I used to sit at the piano with my uncle and we'd just make up really kind of weird avant-garde piano duets. I never envisaged what I've ended up doing, and I don't think I would have chosen it if I knew, but at the same time I'm so grateful that I've taken the path that I have, because it's been so varied And although I would love to have concentrated on my own music that whole time, I kind of did. I just did it. I've been doing it in the background. Nobody's been able to see that. I've been honing my craft slowly over a long period of time. But I think actually doing some of those other, some of that session work that I've become a bit more known for is never a bad thing in terms of maybe giving my own music a bit more credibility.
Sure. So you said you used to sit at the piano when you were a kid. So are you classically trained, or are you kind of self-taught, or how did you enter? How did music come into your life?
Yeah, I am classically trained as a pianist, a little bit vocally as well. So I started piano lessons when I was 6, and kind of did that in a classical structure until I was about 17, I think.
Right. So grade 8, all of that kind of stuff. Yeah.
I did all the grades. I went through all of that. And I just, whilst doing that, I would also I had a kind of parallel path almost of really loving pop music and songs and writing songs, and singing eventually. And I did a few kind of classical singing lessons and grades and sang in choirs as well. So yeah, it was always there from a young age. I've got a musical family. My sister did the same thing. She's 2 years older than me, and she started piano lessons when she was 6. She's kind of carried on down the classical route, but I've done a bit of
it's quite an unusual combination of things. I mean, you're very lucky to be able to have done both at the same time, because usually you would fight with that. You would probably, the general path is you start doing that when you're in your teens, because that's when you start to notice music and all of that stuff. But you started much earlier, and pop, which I think is great. A very underrated art form, I think, pop music.
Yeah, I mean, I love it. I always have. But yeah, I think it's interesting what you say about the sort of the regimented kind of nature of classical music. I do have an element of that in my personality anyway. I like things, I like to be prepared, and I like to have a certain level of what am I going to be doing, and knowing what I'm doing, and a little bit of not knowing is scary, but at the same time, I think I've found a way to combine the two, the freedom of less regimented music, and I'm not talking like jazz improvisation. I've done a lot of improvisation in my life, but I would say it's more in the when I was a teenager. This is another kind of path of my musical influences, is that I really got into, when I was introduced to the American minimalism movement.
Right. And
the sort of surrounding avant-garde composers, so like Steve Reich, Terry Riley, and John Cage, and the Cage Circle, as they called it. And I was really into that. So the freedom of that, I think I've taken with me since I discovered that. That was a bit of kind of light bulb moment for me, getting into particularly Steve Reich, and actually all the kind of music concrete composers as well, which I learned about at the same time and were around a similar time. And also Steve Reich is kind of a part of that, because he's done a lot of tape music. So I think although
that sort of fits with the pop, because I mean a lot of that, certainly Steve Reich and the Terry Riley and that kind of system, what's known as systems music, which is it's sort of pattern repetition and the slow movement and kind of the cycles with which they interact with different parts. It's a very interesting area of music, and in a way, it's like that whole thing about jamming and improvisation. A lot of it is, we're all guilty. I don't know if you're guilty. I'm certainly guilty of sitting there and just jamming over the same 4 or even 2 bars of a 16-step sequence on my insert name of sequencer here, and just you get into this kind of almost like Zen-like state, don't you? Where it's quite pleasing to be part of. I'm not sure. It takes skill to be able to do it so that other people might appreciate it, but it's still a very satisfying way of expressing yourself musically, I think.
Yeah, I agree. I think jamming or improvising or whatever, however you want to frame it, has, for me personally, two purposes. And one is the sort of the therapeutic side of it, the kind of meditative, like you say, you get into the flow state. And the other one is almost like a songwriting tool in itself, in that, I might improvise something, and rather than go, okay, there's a piece of music, I've just splurged and there it is, I'll then kind of hack into it and piece it together in a more structured way. So I think, maybe it's more a part of my life than I think. It's just not...
Very interesting you use the word splurge, because my next question, actually, and that's not a joke, was how was the process for the EP? How is your creative process? Do you take your time, or are you a splurger? And I'm not making that up. That's actually what I wrote down. So it's interesting that you use the same term. I mean, how do you... I mean, I get the sense that you like to take your time and like to, when you say you prepare, you like to have things right. And I know you've been working with the same collaborator for a long time, so you obviously have a relationship that works creatively. But are you quick or are you slow, or are there parts that are quick and parts that are slow?
Yeah, I think the latter. I feel like I found a new process. I wouldn't say process, because it's never the same for me. From song to song, but I feel an element of freedom that I didn't feel before. I have taken a long time with songs before, or had songs sit for years and then they're ready. One of the songs, Fragile Creature, on the EP, that's one of those.
Right.
I wrote and did a really rough demo of that, I don't know, maybe about 10 years ago.
Right.
And then brought it into the studio and had quite a liberating process of like, you know what, I'm not going to do anything with this demo. This is unlike anything else I've done. I'm not going to develop it production-wise, just going to go into the studio. TJ Allen and I went in, and he produced that one. Yeah. And we went in and we spent a day, maybe day and a half, and just went, right, this is the version. And it was almost a deliberate, because we've taken time on things before, and it can get really difficult to move on or complete things that way. So we were quite strict with ourselves and go, right, today is the day we are going to create a version of this song. And we did, and that's essentially the version, with the exception of a couple of overdubs, essentially.
So did you sing it from scratch because you stuck to the arrangement that was in the demo, or did you build on the demo from the...
Yeah, it's all pretty much as I demoed it, minus one note change in one of the vocal harmonies. That's it.
Oh, interesting.
But it was, the demo is pretty, the demo, it's a bit embarrassing, but it was piano and vocal.
Right.
And there were strings instead of synths.
Okay.
And I used, the dial-up tone sound, like internet dial-up. I sampled that and pitched it down, and that was that kind of atmospheric sound was what was going through it, and we sort of recreated that with sort of reverse vocal samples and synths and things like that.
I mean, like you say, you like to prepare, but sometimes working to a deadline, obviously, you extract things from yourself that you didn't know were there, or you didn't know you would do them in that way, because you just think, well, that'll have to do. You have to let it go quite quickly. And I was listening to another interview you did, and you were saying that one of the things you learn about a lot of areas of music in terms of collaboration, in terms of playing live, touring with various different acts and fitting in, is the letting go aspect, and being able to just kind of go, you know what, that's fine. And I'm curious, because a lot of working in any creative industry, I think, is the ability to be able to do that, because most people find it quite brutal when they first get in, because they've attached themselves to this thing that they made, and they've gone, this is what I'm, that maybe all their kind of hopes and confidences are in it for the first time at least, and then somebody just goes, yeah, no, that's no good, let's do this, or it doesn't get picked up on, and it can be quite sort of difficult to deal with that level of rejection, or you can take it very personally when in fact it's just a process, right?
Yeah, collaboration can be really hard, and I actually feel like I'm quite lucky to have more recently experienced a collaboration that I'm working on at the moment with an artist called Kate Brooks that came about during, I think, the first lockdown, one of the lockdowns, remotely. And we ended up writing a load of music remotely before we'd ever even met in person. And right from the offset, there were no expectations, it was so free, and we weren't precious about neither of us were particularly precious about any of our ideas. We just thought, well, whatever this ends up being, whatever, it's fine. And it was kind of like a musical consequences where one of us would send an idea, whether that was like one improvised pass of an instrument or a loop or something a bit more developed, and we'd keep passing it back and forth, each kind of developing it each time. And every time we did that, there was like, yep, I don't mind, do whatever you want with that. I am absolutely not precious at all. And that was just so liberating. And I found that it's actually been really rewarding. And we now have almost an album's worth of material that I'm really proud of just because of the process, like you say.
Right.
It's not about the product. It was the most enjoyable process in many ways.
When you're working with a live act, I mean, I'm guessing what happens is somebody, sees a band live, sees you are in it, finds out who you are, or word of mouth, and you get offered a gig, say, Florence or Goldfrapp or whatever it may be. Do those, when that happened for the first time, how did you find yourself adapting into that? Because it's a pretty terrifying the first bit is really scary because you don't know anybody necessarily. You're not sure how they work things, but you've obviously been chosen because they think you're going to fit in, so it's not going to be a complete mismatch. But how did you approach that, and how did it work for you the first time that happened?
Yeah, that's interesting because I think actually now you mention it, most of the jobs that I've done, when I started, I didn't know who I was working with beforehand. So yeah, I always find that a really kind of anxiety-inducing part of the job is the beginning where you first meet them and hope that you get on. And I think one of the big things that artists will look for is chemistry and whether you get on, not just can you play, are you a good musician or whatever, or do you look the part? Because, let's face it, that is a consideration.
Yeah, sure.
But, I remembered having a meeting up with Alison Goldfrapp before we started, before I did my first gig. I can't remember when that was, that we met, but just to see how we got on, just to kind of hang out. We had a drink. Her manager was there as well. We just sort of hung out, the three of us, had a bit of a chat. I think films came into the conversation, just talking about our likes and things, and that really helped actually in coming into it and feeling welcome. And
so in terms of when you get in, I mean, you presumably, were you hired just as keyboards, or were you hired for the fact that you were working with synthesizers and technology? Because that's a big part of it, and it's still a shame. It shames me to see that there aren't a lot of women working in electronic music from a session point of view. Did you find that was just already came to you, or did you have to learn on the job for that sort of thing?
Well, there was a time where I did have to learn, but, from Goldfrapp onwards, I would say that was quite a factor in why I was chosen for certain jobs, because I do have the technological side to what I do, but also actually because I sing as well.
Right.
And basically anyone that can do more than one thing in a band is going to save some money.
Yeah, that's true.
And I'm not saying that's the sole reason, but yeah. So the technical stuff, it definitely does help, whether it's using a laptop or using a synth. There was a time where I did, the first time I ever started using a laptop live was when I was touring with a theatre company called the Paper Cinema. Actually, this picture behind me is from that, I've just realised, from the show. It was sort of like shadow puppetry, but in the style of that. I had to use Main Stage for that, and it was quite an involved show, and I'd never used it before. I had to learn it in like a couple of weeks or something before we started rehearsals, and it was quite new. It was a new interface.
Didn't work all that well. Well, I remember when it first came out.
Yeah. When did it first come out?
Wow. Well, it was when Logic and Main Stage, I think, because I remember we were switching over to it with Goldfrapp, because I used to do the keyboard text for Goldfrapp to transition to live. And I think it's just after that, because before that it was all samplers. I mean, I think the thing is, though, with all of that technology, because you say you like to prepare, you are able to set things. It's not like you have to choreograph the entire thing, because you can store all of these states that you can then recall back. And in many ways, while it's more complex to set up, it's actually a great... it alleviates a lot of that. Am I going to be able to hit that button in time? Am I going to be able to set the volume in time? You've got control over all those things. So in many ways, it allows you to do a lot more, right?
Yeah, I think the point of having something so technologically involved is so that you can focus on the performance, not so that the audience is watching you with a mouse and a keyboard, and like doing lots of stuff with a laptop. That's not the point at all. So yeah, that's kind of what I strive for if I'm ever using a laptop live, is to program it in a way that it's the easiest to perform, so that I can concentrate. For things like when I toured with Birdie, there were a lot of sample triggering things involved, and I had to be really quite clever about where I put certain samples so that I could trigger different samples while playing
something else,
a musical part.
Wow.
And then half that part, half my hand would do one thing. And
multi-timbral fingers. Wow.
But it worked, and it did allow me to focus on the performing. And, once I'd figured out how it was going to work, I'd just learn the part, and then it would work, and it's fine.
So what do you, I know you're a big fan, or well, you work with Udo Audio, and I've seen you've done some great videos of the Super 6, and I think I can just see the Super Gemini behind you. You're a very lucky person to have one of those there. There will be a lot of people who are going, oh my God, I can't wait to get my hand. We filmed that at Super Booth with George, and it was the biggest video. Everybody's gone crazy for it. Because you used, is it the OB6 you're a big fan of as well? Because you did that thing with Harriet Riley, Ghosts, which is where I first saw your sort of your standalone work, I suppose. And I know you use it a lot, because I've heard you talk about it when we've worked together. Is that something that you really kind of gravitate? You try and include that in all your work, because it's an instrument you gravitate towards.
Yeah, so it's the Prophet 6 that I've got.
Prophet 6, right? Okay.
But they're quite close, aren't they? Oh yeah, I absolutely love it. Yeah, so I had the Prophet 6 for that video on the bottom, and then a Mofo X4, the Dave Smith, on top. The Prophet 6 does feature quite a bit among many other synths in the EP. And it continues to feature in mostly everything I do, because I love it. It's so versatile, and it sounds great. It is,
and you definitely, there's a couple of tracks. The opening track on the EP, which is it not The Embrace? It's the...
Enclosure.
Enclosure. There's a line in it, and I'm just going, that is so Japan. It's just there's so much Japanness about it, which I think is a lovely kind of, but it doesn't define the entire track. But those who know will know. Was that conscious? It seems like there is a common thread there. Obviously, you did Ghosts. There's that little Japanness in there as well. Are you a fan of their work?
Yeah, I am. But interestingly. There aren't many synths on that track, and a lot of the sounds that you might hear and think that they're a synth, they're actually not. And maybe one of the sounds you're thinking about. But yeah, I absolutely love Japan. Some of those kind of Prophet 5 plucky sounds that they do, or there's a lot of Prophet 5 in what they do. I'm very into. But yeah, so for that song, just a slight diversion. Most of the sounds are actually samples of things manipulated and turned into instruments, and the lead sound that happens just after the first chorus, that's kind of a plucky sound, was actually 2 samples layered. One of them was a plucked hairband, and the other one was a tapped mug, I think, or something like that.
Oh, nice.
And that's another thing that I love to do a lot, not just synths, but I'm very into music concrete, essentially, and finding samples found sound and turning them into musical elements. And that's actually quite a heavily featured element of the record. All of the songs have that kind of running through, and the first 2 tracks in particular. Yeah.
No, nice. Yes, and I do encourage people to go and check it out. You can get it on Spotify. I mean, it's all good places. hazelmills.com is the place to find all of that stuff. So coming back to the live work, I mean, I think not a lot of people perhaps don't realise how much, or sometimes how little time you have, because often when you're getting a gig, unless you're in at the beginning when the band is formed, more often than not, you're being brought in at a kind of, either our usual keyboard because it can't make it, or we've started to use instruments and we need someone to play these things live because none of us really do. We're doubling up because we play guitars or whatever. Do you find that what is the process generally? You can talk us through that process of, you get the call, you go, you've got the job. What happens next?
It really varies. If it's a process that I'm involved in, which many of them have been, the last couple of recent ones, it's been a little bit more, here are the parts, here you go, which is lovely. But yeah, there's certainly been a couple of times where I've been very involved in how are we going to make this happen live? What parts? For example, with Florence, I worked quite closely for a period of time with the musical director, Alex Lee, in kind of dissecting the songs, or dissecting some of the part. He obviously did a huge part of the job, but he then brought me in at a certain point to sort of look at how playable are these, and how do you think we can create these sounds, and is this for you, or thinking about some of the other band members, how do we delegate some of these parts, and it really depends on how it translates live, whether it's needed or whether it's an interesting enough part to include or an important enough part to include. So yeah, that's quite a big part of it.
You do so it's quite a technical process, or can be quite a technical process. So you'll help put that because I remember when I had to do it, it was because you're working in, not only that, when you're rehearsing, you have to have sort of a negative, which is everything that isn't being played, so that people can understand where they fit in, and also if you've got any playback, that is, and then a positive which shows them which is what they're playing, so that they can see what they're playing, and just that process of exploding it out into the constituent parts can be quite mind-blowingly complicated.
Yeah, it can be really confusing. Because I did for Florence and also for Birdie, I designed all of the main stage patches myself. Right. With Goldfrapp, as you know, a lot of them already existed, but actually for a couple of the newer songs, Angie, the other keyboard player, we worked together in creating some of those, and realised that there's so many layers, and okay, is this being covered live? Where's that going to go? And it's so intricate that you've got to get it right live, and it's but at the same time it's a really fun process. Yeah, no, I enjoy that. I mean, which again takes me to another thing about playing live. A lot of live performance is inevitably about ego. It's a projection thing. It's and what you get from the audience, and that sort of helps feed itself, which helps you
become more theatrical or lose yourself in the music or something, I mean, how much freedom do you get to kind of inhabit that that persona of live, or do you just try and focus purely on the job? Or do you leave a little bit of space for the sort of the theatricality of it?
I think it's quite important to have that element, even if you're not the main focus. Because although part of me has always been like, just step back and blend into the background a little bit. At the same time, it really does depend on the band and the situation and who you're working with. But sometimes it's okay, or maybe even good, to step forward a bit and have some personality come through in your performance and give. I think it's just all about responding to what's happening. So what are the other musicians giving? And if you're working with a solo artist or someone who's the main focus, what kind of energy are they giving, and how can you complement that? So sometimes you do need to be a bit more theatrical.
Have you been handed the guitar yet in any of your roles?
Yeah, well, with Goldfrapp.
Oh, you got to play the guitar. I didn't remember, because I came after we did the interview. I came to see the gig, which I thought was fantastic, and really for me, obviously, because I worked on that album and it was extremely, brought an awful lot of stuff back from doing those sessions and then those early gigs and whatnot, and I suppose I don't remember a guitar in that particular one, because Felt Mountain didn't have a lot of that.
Yeah, it's possible that we either only used it for one song, or that might have been one of the nights where we didn't use it at all, because it didn't come out a lot for that tour, obviously, as you say, because Felt Mountain isn't really that kind of thing. But yeah, that's the only opportunity I've had to play a guitar is with Goldfrapp. But it was. And
are you a foot on the monitor kind of status quo kind of gal, or do you just sort of just concentrate on getting the part? Because I mean, it's easy to go. As soon as you've got one in your hands, you're kind of like, it's almost like, well, you can or you can't. It's up to you. How you do that?
Well, I really try not to ham it up too much. But you can't help but get into it. So I think I'm a bit more of a kind of violent head thruster than anything else. But that's just because that's how I move when I'm playing it, depending on the song. But you can't not move to some of those songs,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So touring life. I mean, because you seem, like I say, we were speaking before the show. You're quite a private person. You're not out there on lots of social media. You're not kind of projecting the Hazel Mills brand all over the place. I mean, obviously, part of this interview is to help promote the EP, which, as I said, everybody should look at. How do you find touring life? Does it sit well with you? Has it taken a while to kind of find your groove, or or do you love it? I mean, where does it sit in your life experiences spectrum?
I do love it. I really love it. I'm just trying to think back to my early days of touring, and I loved it then as well. I love all aspects of it. The traveling, the seeing new places, the seeing a different audience every night. Yeah, I do really love it.
And how do you survive? Because obviously it's really easy first time you go out to just party the whole time and really live the life, and then there's sort of nothing left by the time you get back, or you find yourself a few weeks in and you think, crikey, I really need to sort this out, because otherwise I'm not going to be able to make it throughout. I mean, it requires quite a lot of discipline, I think, as well, right?
Yeah, I'm quite good at pacing myself. I've never really been got into that kind of real partying on the road kind of thing. I think partly maybe because as a singer, you have to be extra careful. You're carrying your instrument around with you everywhere. So you do have to be kind of on another level, really looking after yourself to make sure that you can actually perform.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, it's interesting, though, because also there's some people, if you spend a lot of time on tour, I mean, it depends. I think that the level of tour support that perhaps one used to get in the, last century and what you get these centuries. You know, people would come back from touring and kind of almost not know how to live their lives because they didn't have to do anything. They were told, right, we need to go here now, we need to do this there. I mean, there's still an element of that. You know, you're being managed kind of 24/7 to a degree. I mean, how hard do you find it to give up that level of control? Because I find it really difficult. I'd want to be doing my own thing a lot of the time over a prolonged period of touring, I think.
Yeah, I do. I certainly do often look forward to cooking a meal when I get home, like cooking my dinner.
Right.
Maybe even look forward to doing my own laundry if it's a tour where I don't do that. Well, actually, no, that's
not shrinking it. Yeah,
but that's it depends on the type of tour that you're on. But yeah, and my own space, obviously, that's quite important to me. That can be one of the difficult parts of touring, is that I need a lot of quiet time.
Yeah.
But that's, you do still get that. Even, if you're on a bus, the bunk, I love a bunk. It's like the private space, and it's quiet and cozy. And, but yeah, that can be difficult for a lot of people, I think, is the close proximity to so many people for so long.
And I think the other thing that perhaps a lot of people, people who've not toured or perhaps don't know what the musician's life can be like, there's so much time when you're actually not doing anything at all. You're waiting, you're just hanging about, and then keeping your energy levels up so that when you get to go on stage, you're ready and you've got the juice in the tank.
Yeah, you kind of have to come up with a bit of your own routine, because once the rehearsals are over, that's the most intense part of it for the musician, not for the crew. They work so hard on tour. But, I think often a lot of the work goes in the rehearsal process, and it's really intense. And then once you've got over that first bit of touring where you're kind of on a bit of a roll, you do realise that, okay, I've got, until sound check at 3:00. What do I do? And you might already be at the venue because you've arrived in on a tour bus. And I think it's situations like that where you have to be quite strict with yourself and say, right, I'm going to go to the gym, or, I've got other work that I need to do, or I'm going to do some writing. It's a great opportunity to do a bit of writing on the road if you've got you don't need a lot with you, really.
Yeah, what do you take? I'm curious about that, because we've discussed this on Sonic Talk before, where people who kind of go, yeah, well, I went on tour, I did this PR tour or whatever, and I took all of this stuff that I was going to be sitting in the hotel room writing, and I just never used it. It stayed in the box, But so you have to be, and practicing presumably is keeping your muscles and technique kind of going.
Yeah, I guess I would sort of do that once things are set up in the venue.
Right.
Perhaps, and then find a quiet spot somewhere to do vocal exercises. But yeah, I would. I don't think I would necessarily take a lot with me, because I've found ways of doing things in the box, and there are some great plugins that I would either replace later, or if they're the right sound, then that's fine. Whether it's a piano or a synth or whatever. This thing actually. It's been great.
What is that?
The
is it the Arturia thing?
It's a Microlab.
Yes.
Arturia Microlab, and it's really durable and really portable. So that's obviously it's small and it's small keys, but
you can input.
If sometimes you can find ways of either borrowing a MIDI keyboard from the tour that you're on that morning. Say, oh, can I just take this and use this, or that there are ways, or I might take something like, I've never taken this on tour, but this is quite a good, hang on. Another Arturia one, actually, which is the Micro Freak.
Yeah. Just had a firmware update,
Very
in fact.
portable.
Very portable.
Yes. Yeah, I haven't done that yet, actually. Thank you for the reminder.
But you've also got, I can see you've also, you obviously got a love of kind of large format instruments, large synthesizers, and the Super 6 you've done quite a lot of stuff with that in terms of the relationship you have with them, and done some videos. And the Prophet 6. What else? What other keyboards are you regularly reach for?
So
when
you can probably see a few there, but my Prophet isn't back from Australia yet, and I'm starting to get really itchy. Like, I don't know when I'm getting it. All my synths are in different places. I've got a Juno 106 somewhere across Bristol, my Prophet, who knows where. But I've also got, I could probably just turn the camera a little bit. There's a Moog Sub 37 here.
Ah, yes. Very good for performing the Sub 37, isn't it?
I generally use it as a live instrument, and here, which is still new for me, and I've not really got stuck in yet because I've only just acquired it. I'm borrowing this Super Gemini from UDO. Cannot wait to give it a go.
Are we going to be seeing some videos?
And I've got a couple of other synths that you can't see over there, actually.
Are we going to see some videos on the of the Super Gemini from you then? Is that part of the arrangement?
Yes, you will.
Excellent.
Yeah,
I can't wait
definitely.
to get my hands on it. I mean, people are responding extremely well. It's really interesting, isn't it, that somebody's gone, George just went for, I'm going to put all the knobs on, all the faders, it's all there. And that's so unusual. Everybody's always trying to find ways to sort of reduce that. And it's still managed to make it relatively affordable. I mean, it's an expensive thing, but it's the only time I've ever seen the comments of a new synth that is of a certain price and people going, oh, I thought it'd be more expensive. Like loads of people, which is such a surprise.
Nice. That's good. Yeah, I suppose it's just everything is grabbable. I think that was his thought process. He wants it to be a performative thing. So, there's less, I think probably less menu diving, and you've obviously got the ribbon controller as well, which is, I can't wait. Is that
an MPC-1 as well up there on the top?
It's a Live 2,
okay.
which actually this I used a lot on the EP for some of the sampling and the mangling. I love this thing because it's the one with. Do you want a closer look? So.
Yeah. Okay.
So speakers. Hang on, I'm just going to put that.
And there's the Super Gemini. Everybody loves the Super Gemini.
Yeah, so you want to have a look at that?
You haven't had a chance to play with it much yet, but is there anything specifically that's really caught your ear?
I think I'm really excited about it sounds amazing just off the bat, The possibilities with the layering and the splitting, because it's multi-timbral. I turned it on for about 10 minutes and had a little look. I haven't had time yet. So this is my immediate, what do you call it? Response to it.
First impressions, yeah.
I think I'm getting a little bit of,
So
anyway.
So what's next for you, Hazel? I mean, summer traditionally is, I mean, obviously since COVID, it's been hard to kind of get, that there's not as many tours going out, but summer is traditionally festivals and whatnot. I mean, that was another question before you answer that question, because playing live is very, very different. It's a myriad of different experiences. It's the small club, it's the larger theatre, it's a stadium, it's a stage where you can barely see your other band members. That's something I always find quite interesting, because you have to be so adaptable, because obviously you're not going to hear always the same things that you might need to hear. Do you find that? Do you like a larger stage or a smaller stage? What is it that what's your ideal performing environment?
I think I like both. When I haven't been on a smaller stage for ages, and in an intimate venue, and I perform in one, I'm suddenly like, oh my, this is so vibey. I love it. Everyone's so close, and you can smell the audience. It's great. But then at the same time, when I'm on bigger stages, it's like, oh, I can move. We can. I think there are pros and cons to each, because when you're that far away from each other, obviously it can be harder to connect and have that chemistry, not just with the other musicians, but with the audience as well. But maybe then for that reason, it's easier to get into some kind of flow state.
Yeah,
arguably.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because, I mean, on a big stage, you're sort of more isolated. It's just like you and your job in hand. Whereas if you're sort of on top of each other, I suppose there's a sort of blurring of the of the oneness of it, which is easier to maybe feel that on a smaller stage. But I guess it happens on bigger stages, and when it does happen and you get that moment where it's happening for you and it's happening for the audience, and then suddenly you get those people who have like these religious experiences at Glastonbury Pyramid stage is the sort of is quite a measure of that, when you get to play in front of that many people and they're all so into it and you're really on your game, and it's just this moment of, you can sense it, can't you, even through the television, when that is, there's just a thing going on. It's really interesting. Yeah, and I struggle to remember a lot of venues that I've played at, and I think maybe it's for that reason. If somebody might say, "Oh, have you ever played this venue?" Like, maybe I don't remember. Right. And if I did, I don't really have a memory of the performance itself, and maybe that's because I'm in some kind of flow state, and then I saw I don't know if you've seen in the news recently about Taylor Swift, loads of fans coming back from a concert of hers with amnesia, and they can't remember the concert. And then because it goes on to explain that they're in this kind of hysteria flow state or whatever, that their brain isn't gonna work in the same way in terms of storing the memory. So maybe that's why I don't remember. I really would be interested to investigate that more, because a flow state, when you're on a stage in front of in a high jeopardy situation, let's face it. I mean, it is quite a kind of, you're getting adrenaline because you don't want to mess it up, but you're also getting the amazing kind of feeling, and so your body must go into kind of, only the important things I need to worry about. Don't fall over. There are things. I get a similar sort of thing when I'm at a trade show. When there's this huge amount of stimulation all day at roughly 96 decibels, just continuously. The short-term memory goes, and I forget lots and lots and lots of things. I can barely remember anything, but because I've done it enough times, and again, because you've rehearsed and the muscle memory is there, you'll be able to do your job. But I mean, ultimately, it's like you're resisting the ultimate distraction to get it right in a lot of ways. Yeah, and part of me wonders if that much adrenaline is a good thing. Whether it can be exhausting. Yes. When you're on a tour and you're getting that much kind of high adrenaline every night, there comes a drop with that as well. Yeah. You've got to come down from it. And that, all those spikes, that's maybe it's, if there's some way of channeling. I don't know anything about the flow state, but I'm really interested to learn, actually. I'm quite intrigued by it. But if there's some kind of more level version of that isn't like all the highs and then all the lows. I suppose this is the self-medicating, isn't it? That's the classic rock and roll tour, where you just sort of medicate your way through the lows and then ready for the highs again the next night. But yeah, I mean, it's unsustainable, isn't it? Obviously, and also there are lots of physical manifestations of having too much adrenaline. You can burn out your inner ear with too much adrenaline. It's a thing that happens in the theatre. I mean, it's the ilia. It's not permanent, but it can result in that. What's the word? Labyrinthitis. Wow. So you lose your balance because there's so much adrenaline. That can happen, and is something that's quite well known in theatrical. Fields or circles. It happened to my daughter when she was playing a starring role in Annie, and she was only 12, 13, and she blew out her ears and just became, just lost her balance for 2 weeks, and it came back, but it can. I mean, there's a lot of ways in which that can manifest itself. I mean, it's extreme amounts of any kind of hormonal stuff being dumped into your system is difficult to manage. I mean, but the human body is an amazing thing. I don't want to worry you there, Hazel, I'm sure. But no, I'm just find that really interesting. I mean, I personally suffer from that a lot often. I don't know if you could diagnose it as labyrinthitis, but I do get that sort of vertigo, dizziness a lot. Ah, interesting. And in cold weather,
my inner ears get really painful and I get dizzy, so I have to cover my ears. But so I just thought, I didn't know there was a connection there. That's really interesting.
Oh, okay.
But going on back onto the sort of, well, just thinking about all the highs and lows, and another way to help that for me has been meditation, which I try and do regularly on tour. I do regularly at home, but on tour I find it really helps, and I use a guided app for it. But you can use substances to try and get through these things, but for me that doesn't work. So, well, okay, maybe the occasional one, but
I think surviving. I think again, people who've not experienced the tour are not aware of that, because I mean, when everything's great, it's great, but when there's sort of an issue, maybe the singer has a bad throat and you might have to take on more extra duties, or there's been a data corruption thing and the techs are trying to restore the set because it's not, there's so many things that can happen that make it extremely stressful for either everybody or certain members of the crew, and there has to be a lot of understanding in that, and it's really difficult because also, for the same token, before you go on stage, you say you have your certain process, and when that's thrown out of kilter, sometimes that can be really disruptive. So it's important to kind of try while having your method of coping with it, you've got to be flexible and be able to roll with the surprises as well, right?
It's true. Yeah. I think that's something that over the years I'm learning more and more to do, is to learn to accept things that you can't control, that that might not be ideal. And you actually reminded me of our that Goldfrapp Glastonbury experience, where we went on 20 minutes late because exactly that happened. The laptops decided to have a freak out just before we went on stage. And it's all being live broadcast and everything.
I didn't know that.
And so that was quite scary.
Oh my.
It was, do you know what it was? It was main stage. Decided to allocate all of the MIDI controllers. So in reallocating them,
they were all
under pressure. The keyboards were reallocated, but none of my pedals were doing anything, and my guitar was also not doing, because that's a MIDI controller. So I couldn't sustain anything, and the guitar wasn't working, so I just had to mime. So it was a bit.
I didn't know that. That is, and Glastonbury presumably was it the televised one?
Yeah.
Oh.
It was on. You could watch it on.
Considered to be one of those momentous performances, actually. When you often see people talking about that one, certainly Strict Machine and whatnot were playing, and it was just everybody. It's just the audio. There must have been something about that whole energy of that freaking out that transferred into positive stuff. So I mean, I suppose that's good. It. But
yeah, that's the thing, because the audience, once we finally got on stage, they were even more raring to go. They were amazing. They were really understanding and just ready for it. And of course, the set had to get cut short, so that's obviously really disappointing. Yeah. But it maybe for that reason it had that level of energy that you don't get if it's just everything's running smoothly. So.
Wow, interesting. So what's next, Hazel? I mean, like I started this whole thing, but before we went down that kind of fork in the road, was what's next for you? Summer's traditionally, festivals and gigs and stuff. Have you got stuff lined up?
Yeah, I've got a couple of live things, not quite yet confirmed, so I won't tell you what they are yet. But yeah, a couple of I think 3 shows with one project and a possible thing in 2024. Whoa. But actually I'm kind of concentrating on the writing at the moment, and not just my own stuff and the collaboration that I told you about earlier with Kate Brooks. And then, you know, moving on from that, I'll be working on a solo album. But I'm also doing a bit of co-writing with other artists. So I've just sort of started dipping my toes into that, which has been really fun. So yeah, more of that as well.
Excellent. And also, you know, as we know, I mean, any musician will know, more threads, more, and writing the songs is definitely a good way to kind of make sure you get paid later in life. If you can write some songs that, you know, that go places, it's definitely worth putting the effort in. Hazel, thank you so much for talking to us. It's been a rather rambling chat on my part. I thought I'd structured the interview better than I had, but I think, you know, you just got to go where it takes you. But so thank you.
No,
very
it's
much.
been great. Thank you. Thanks for having me.